Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Senator's Rival by Emily Hayes. Narrated by Madeline Sandston. Chapter 1. Francesca. There has never been a more crucial time than now for our voices to be heard. Francesca Thurston's impassioned, confident voice rang out throughout the arena. Each and every one of us has the power to change history and shape a better future for ourselves and those who follow, and we can, together, create an America in which no person is excluded or forgotten. The crowd exploded with applause, cheering and chanting the speaker's name in admiration. An easygoing smile on her face, Francesca fell silent and looked out at the gathered onlookers with pride. This rally was their largest yet, with over 10,000 people in attendance, in addition to countless viewers watching online. Maybe holding a rally in her home state of Massachusetts was a bit of a narcissistic indulgence that wasn't strictly necessary for the campaign, but it definitely helped boost morale among Francesca's teammates and volunteers. Now, at 42 years old, it felt amazing to get a resounding show of support from the locals, who had known her since she'd first stepped into politics almost 2 decades ago. After taking a moment to bask in the excitement, Francesca nodded approvingly at the audience and said, "I am honored to officially accept your nomination for presidential candidate. With your help and support, we will create a country in which equality and unity can become a reality rather than a pipe dream." This time, the roar of applause was deafening. In the bright spotlight, it was almost impossible to make out individual faces among the mass of supporters. There were nothing but blurry blobs in front of Francesca. The energy was palpable, however, an incomparable stream of positive momentum that flowed from the crowd and directly into her. She stood still, grinning, arms outstretched with gratitude as the people showered her with praise. This wasn't why Francesca had gotten into politics. She came from a long line of activists and influential political figures driven by passion and principles instead of fame, and was determined to carry on that legacy. Nonetheless, now that she was here, Francesca had to admit that this sort of recognition was a delightful bonus. Honestly, who wouldn't enjoy standing up in front of thousands and having them cheer you on? Being a senator was often thankless work, with far more complaints and insults from the general public than accolades and compliments, and Francesca was realistic enough to recognize that the presidency would be more of the same. In these moments on the campaign trail, however, it was lovely to just bask for a few minutes, to really savor the moment and take it all in, the rush, the attention, the hope, and the love. No matter what happened going forward, Francesca had created and nurtured this movement, and it had thrived, spreading far beyond its roots and expanding into a national force hoping to elect her as president. Despite everything that could go wrong, the possibility of failure due to the sheer magnitude of the responsibility, all she could feel right now was pure, undiluted joy. "Thank you all so much," Francesca finally called out. "God bless you all, and bless the United States of America." They went wild for it. With a broad smile and a wave, she descended off the stage, brushing off her elegant navy blue pantsuit and smoothing down her sleek, dark brown bob. Her assistants huddled around, helping tidy her appearance before they got to the lobby, where Francesca would be meeting with her key sponsors and staff for drinks and light refreshments. The team buzzed around her with excitement as they strode through the winding halls of the arena. Everyone seemed invigorated by the energy and enthusiasm from the crowd, talking and laughing with renewed vigor and purpose, and congratulating Francesca and each other on yet another successful rally. "Absolutely perfect speech, Frankie," her campaign manager, Juliet, said with satisfaction. The wispy brunette was clutching her clipboard to her chest and walking quickly, her kitten heels clacking against the floor. "The sound was great, the lighting was good, and the audience responded to everything you said. The part about access to affordable childcare is going to generate positive press, should help our polling with on-the-fence suburban moms. Bless you, Jules. What would I do without you? Francesca laughed, patting her old friend's shoulder fondly. Juliet had managed several of her past campaigns, and their familiarity with each other bred comfort and ease. The crowd really turned out for us tonight, didn't they? Francesca added thoughtfully as she followed Juliet down the hall. You're on your home turf here. Would have been worried if we didn't have a solid turnout, Juliet added sardonically, arching a manicured eyebrow. This place is already yours. Maine next week is going to— Yes, Jules, I know, Francesca sighed, giving an exasperated chuckle. Let me have this one for now, all right? Can we save the doom and gloom for tomorrow morning when we're looking at numbers? Yes, ma'am, Juliet replied with a smirk. They strolled down the corridor until they reached the door to the lobby. Before going through, Francesca's team swarmed her, doing light touch-ups to hair and makeup, and quickly running through the names of important attendees so that she could remember names and faces on sight. They made sure that her suit was immaculate and unwrinkled. As always, Francesca took in the information with practiced ease, nodding along and muttering affirmatives in reply to any questions, smiling graciously for everyone involved. She had been a public figure for most of her adult life and was accustomed to this sort of thing. Even as a child, media appearances and political functions had been fairly routine. The Thurston family name was practically synonymous with American politics. Her grandfather had been a renowned civil rights advocate and one of the longest-sitting senators in modern history, pushing through several acts of major legislation during his tenure. Her dad had been a similarly prominent governor of New Hampshire, her home state. High-level politics ran in her blood, and she had grown up in the midst of it, soaking in the atmosphere and learning every nuance almost by absorption. It had given Francesca a thick skin and a keen understanding of what to expect from the press, the public, and other politicians. Mingling with donors and lobbyists was second nature to her, so when she stepped through the door to the waiting crowd, Francesca automatically flashed a smile, as though she had been born for this specific scene. Which was pretty much true. She shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and received hugs, making sure to greet people by their first names as if they were lifelong friends. Taking an interest in the life of every person she spoke to, Francesca's handshake was strong and firm, her dark brown eyes remaining fixed on whomever was speaking. Her demeanor had been practiced, of course, because it would be madness to run a presidential campaign without any kind of preparation or media training. Still, Francesca truly did enjoy interacting with people this way. She liked getting to know people and was genuinely interested in learning about her sponsors and followers. Getting to know the people supporting her campaign and understanding their hopes and dreams made the entire venture so much more than a job. It made Francesca feel proud of the campaign, of the movement they were building, and of the promise of good things to come. The future of the world itself might be better if things went according to plan. "So glad you could attend this evening, Robert," she said to an older gentleman, shaking his hand firmly. "How's your daughter enjoying college? Did she pick a major yet?" "Business, surprisingly," he exclaimed, laughing at himself as he straightened his tie. "You're an inspiration to these young people, Francesca. It means a lot to my Emily to see someone like you breaking the mold, stepping out on a limb and being true to yourself." It was easy to smile at that. Of course, Francesca knew that not everyone shared his opinion. The majority of the conservative base was against her, simply due to her sexuality. Being the first openly gay woman to be nominated as a presidential candidate was controversial, and she was often met with harsh criticism, particularly within certain religious circles. That was to be expected, however, and it didn't hurt any more than it would damage a duck's feathers to be splashed with water. Early on in her political career, Francesca had made the decision to live authentically and proudly. Since then, she had stuck to her guns. Despite anyone's objections, she had won her party's official nomination by a landslide. To her supporters, her experience, charisma, and long list of accomplishments spoke for themselves, so they backed her as their champion without reservation. Winning over the swing states would be tricky, of course, but if anyone was up to the challenge, it was her. For about an hour, Francesca walked around the lobby, meeting with donors and interacting with her team. greeting a few members of the press who had been invited to report on the event. Photographers took pictures, reporters asked questions, and her team followed her diligently to make sure she interacted with everyone she should. Everyone who wanted a handshake, a hug, or a few moments of Francesca's time received it, and she kept a congenial smile on her face throughout. After the final group photos had been taken and the last potential donor greeted, Francesca finally waved goodbye and headed out to her car. On her way through the winding streets of Boston, she leaned back and closed her eyes, taking a moment to rest and reflect on the last few whirlwind days. It had been a flurry of TV appearances, speeches, phone calls, and strategy meetings. But she was officially a presidential candidate who was backed by her party. Despite all the planning and campaigning that had gone into making this happen, it still felt surreal. The car arrived at the restaurant and her driver stepped out, opening Francesca's door for her. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air wash over her. Then she walked inside, where her family was waiting. At a large table sat 3 young adults of mixed race who looked so different from each other that they had rarely been taken for siblings when they were kids. This might have been because their mother's side of the family was Irish or Scottish-looking, with pale skin, freckles, and red hair. Meanwhile, their father's side of the family was black, with dark skin and tightly coiled hair. Like most black people with ancestors from the South, slavery had been part of his family's history. As a result, the Thurston siblings didn't look very much like each other. Instead, they resembled a mosaic of humanity with all its shades, textures, and hues. Eleanor and Samuel, the 2 youngest, were probably the most different from each other in looks. Eleanor was the spitting image of her mother, just a bit darker, while Samuel was nearly a mirror image of their father. Francesca and Marcus both straddled the middle ground. Marcus's skin was a bit darker than Francesca's, while her hair was a bit straighter. However, they were of similar height and build, and shared the same defined jawlines, almond-shaped brown eyes, and high cheekbones. "I'm telling you, Ellie, it's about precedent. The case in 1986 set the tone for—" came Samuel's voice. "Okay, yes, I get that, but there's also the question of whether that precedent is actually applicable in this situation," Eleanor interrupted her brother's impassioned rant. "I mean, the scope has changed so much since then, and, well, if you want to get technical about it, there are ways to interpret the law so that the precedent still holds true," Samuel argued. "It's all about the wording of the statutes and—" "Good evening," Francesca interjected with a chuckle as she took the empty chair between her arguing siblings. "Have these 2 been at it all night again?" she asked Marcus. His pained expression answered her question with no words necessary. Marcus slumped back in his chair, holding his wine glass, looking half exhausted and half resigned. There was no way to interrupt Eleanor and Samuel when they got started on the subject of congressional law. Eleanor was a public defender, while Samuel was an assistant professor of law at Harvard. This meant that they both had a vested interest in the topic, and could always find something new to debate. "I see," Francesca murmured, nodding her head toward Marcus and pursing her lips in sympathy. "Great speech, Frankie," Eleanor said, reaching over to squeeze her sister's arm. Eleanor was grinning broadly and looked sincerely proud. "A toast to our big sister, the next President of the United States!" "Hear, hear!" the other 2 chimed in, clinking their glasses together in a chorus of cheers. "We've still got a long way to go before that happens," Francesca reminded them, though she couldn't help but smile and flush with delight at the thought. "There is a lot of hard work ahead of us, and we'll be with you every step of the way," Marcus assured her with a nod, patting her shoulder in a show of support. "What do you need from us, boss?" he teased. "Just keep doing what you're doing," Francesca told him with a small laugh. "And try not to cause any major scandals that might derail the campaign. Steer clear of drugs, affairs, and money laundering, or I'm going to have you all in prison by Election Day." They all laughed and launched into a discussion of the campaign, which lasted throughout the meal. Their family had grown up in the heart of politics, so they all had a solid grasp of how the system worked and how the game was played, as well as a clear understanding of public perception and how to navigate the potential minefields that came with being a family member of a high-ranking government figure. In truth, Francesca wasn't worried about any of them. Each sibling had dedicated his or her life to serving others and advocating for civil rights and political enfranchisement in one way or another. None of them were going to do anything to jeopardize her campaign. It was comforting to have her family supporting her this closely. Despite growing up in the eye of the American political storm, the Thurstons were a tight-knit bunch who had always been there for one another, no matter what. With their parents so busy, the kids had relied upon each other, supporting and building each other up as they pursued their ambitions. It was an incredible blessing to have such a strong foundation to fall back on. "So, who do we think you'll be facing off against, Frankie?" Samuel asked as they were eating dessert, a delicious chocolate mousse with vanilla ice cream. "There's no question," Marcus replied with an eye roll. He was a political analyst by trade, working at a leading network as a political correspondent. "Smith is a shoo-in. She's been ahead by a wide margin ever since Bennett dropped out of the race. Everyone else is too far behind to be serious competition." "Those embezzlement rumors came out at an awfully convenient time for her, didn't they?" Eleanor chimed in, arching an eyebrow. "Smith was falling behind because of that stuff about her not representing the interests of rural conservatives. Then all of a sudden, her only competitor has been taking bribes from pharmaceutical companies?" Francesca shrugged non-committally at that. Tim Bennett had been a clear front-runner, exactly the kind of traditional establishment-type candidate with no fresh ideas or strategies. The kind of guy their opponents usually salivated over. And there was no doubt that Margot Smith was a snake in the grass. She had cut her teeth in Congress and done everything right from there on out. Smith had towed the party line and had avoided controversy by hiding in the background. She'd positioned herself as a reliable ally while making just the right promises to win votes. But at this point, Smith was running practically unopposed. The timing of the revelations about Tim Bennett seemed a bit too serendipitous. "Well, more shocking things have happened than a rich white conservative man engaging in quid pro quos with Wall Street," Francesca pointed out wryly. "It certainly doesn't make Smith look good, but we can't be the ones to draw attention to it. We can't afford even the appearance of playing dirty, so we can't back any conspiracy theories." "True enough," Marcus agreed with a sigh. "But we need to be prepared for Smith to do whatever she needs to do, Frankie. Taking the high road is admirable and all, but this is a woman who'll stab you in the back, kick you when you're down, and spit on your corpse as you lie dying to ensure she comes out on top." Francesca laughed at that vivid description, leaning back in her chair as she swallowed a sip of wine. "I have nothing but the utmost respect for my opponent's ambition and ingenuity," she declared theatrically, painting on her most winning, amicable politician's smile. "She is a fierce woman and a worthy competitor." They all laughed at that, exchanging conspiratorial grins. It was a thrilling moment, imagining what might come of the election and everything it could lead to. After years of struggle and frustration, progress seemed to be on the rise. Francesca's campaign was emblematic of a shift toward a brighter future. Whomever she faced off against, Francesca would be prepared. She had faith in the power of democracy, the strength of her supporters, and the undeniable appeal of her message, and she was ready for the challenge awaiting her. Chapter 2. Margot. Margot Smith was sitting at the large wooden desk in front of the camera, dressed all in white. The sun shone brightly behind her, and her position had been angled precisely so that the light formed a glowing aura, her immaculately highlighted golden brown waves framing her perfectly sculpted features. Margot's fair skin seemed to glow as if kissed by sunshine, and when she smiled, her full lips parted to display pearly white teeth. Faint laugh lines marked the edges of her striking blue eyes, giving her face just enough character that her beauty wouldn't be blindingly intimidating to the average viewer. Some people might say she looked like an angel, and that she exuded wisdom, grace, and purity. However, Margot herself would never be so gauche as to say such a thing. That would be vapid and self-centered. But, she'd heard people say that about her. And who was she to argue with the voice of the public? "Good morning, America," Margot announced in a honey-sweet tone tinged with a faint, but not too distinct, Southern accent. She made direct eye contact with the viewers and maintained her steady gaze through the introduction. My name is Margot Smith. It is an honor and a privilege to sit here today before you on behalf of the great state of Virginia as I accept my party's nomination to run for President of the United States. This election year, many of us have come to understand that there is a deeply rooted disconnect between the concerns of the hard-working families who reside within our borders and those policymakers whose decisions will drastically impact their futures. We feel, as one unified party, that it is time for a change. This November, we will offer a different choice for America, a choice for unity and hope and opportunity. Every word had been carefully selected and clearly enunciated, carrying a specific weight, pitch, and rhythm as it rang throughout the room. Everyone in the studio was focused on Margot Smith and the screen with her image, watching intently as the narrative she crafted unfolded. Even the people standing in the background were absolutely silent, knowing that a stray cough or a creaking footstep could throw off her entire delivery. Because this particular address needed to be perfect. In fact, everything Margot touched needed to be perfect, all the time. In this camp, there was no room for failure. If Margot's campaign was going to succeed, she could allow for no mistakes. Margot had rehearsed this speech hundreds of times, perfecting her intonation so she could hit just the right blend of sincerity and conviction without being too stiff or formal. As Margot spoke, her body moved fluidly, shoulders back, hands open, and eyes shining with energy. Her media manager stood off to the side, giving subtle cues via nods of the head or hand movements, just enough to keep Margot on track without disrupting her overall flow, enough to ensure that the footage could be used to its full advantage. The speech was fairly generic, a bunch of fluffy generalities mixed with a few strategic bits of pandering that had been calculated to appeal to certain subsets of the population. All this was delivered with a gravitas that made it seem profound and monumental. The intent had been to reach as many voters as possible without alienating anyone, so the speech was vague and general enough to apply to the masses, particularly to the undecided voters. The ones who were only tangentially interested in politics and could be swayed by a compelling 30-second soundbite on the news. The type of people who could be won over by a well-timed television commercial, for instance, because they were distracted or not interested in paying close attention to politics. There was no point in wasting time on the extreme liberals or socialists. There was no chance they'd vote for Margot's party regardless of who represented them, especially in a presidential election, so convincing them was pointless. However, the hardline right-wingers and religious conservatives were already guaranteed to support the party's nominees. No need to focus too much time or money on wooing them excessively. Margot's resources were better spent on persuadable independents and moderates who weren't firmly entrenched in their views, and whose votes were up for grabs. It was a delicate art form. She had to dance on the fence in order to win over people's hearts and minds without offending folks so badly that they became detractors. As Margot reached the end of her carefully prepared statement, she smiled her dazzling smile and said, "We are tremendously grateful for this opportunity to serve the American people. May God bless this country of ours, and may the American people remain free and prosperous forever. Thank you." The camera zoomed in for the perfect shot of her smiling face, and Margot held that smile until the red light was shut off to signal the end of filming. The crew began to bustle around, shifting lights and equipment, and while speaking quietly among themselves. Margot rose to her feet and brushed her hands down her skirt, then pursed her lips and shot a sharp glare at the director. "Adam, why was a shadow cast on the wall during my left turn?" she demanded, hands on her hips in a commanding posture that made the man in question freeze in his tracks, visibly nervous. "This angle was supposed to be completely lit as I specifically requested on Friday." "My apologies, Mrs. Smith," Adam murmured, rubbing his neck sheepishly. "I assure you, ma'am, the lighting was calibrated to your exact specifications. No shadows should have been visible under— Well, they were, she pointed out icily. And now the sun will have moved enough that we can't reshoot. Which means the perfect start to the most important video of my life is now flawed because you and your team didn't do your jobs correctly. Margot, come on, interjected an exasperated baritone voice from behind the camera. It belonged to William, her husband and partner of almost 20 years. I didn't even notice whatever it is you're upset about. The shot was perfect. Let's let these guys do their jobs now, all right? Her piercing blue eyes fixed on him with the same intensity as one would stare down an obnoxious insect. In response, the tall, slightly graying man in the expensive suit simply corked an amused eyebrow, unmoved by her icy gaze. After the couple stared at each other for a beat, Margot rolled her eyes dramatically and looked back at the director. She nodded reluctantly. Fine. We need to get this out today, so it'll have to do. The tone of Margot's voice made it clear what she thought of that option, but everyone in the room relaxed slightly now that she had begrudgingly consented to move on. Send me the final cut as soon as it's complete and usable. I want to look it over myself. I need it up in time for the 12 o'clock news. With that, Margot turned and strode off, her heels clicking loudly in the spacious studio space as the team hurried to disassemble their setup. On her way to the door, Margot passed her husband, who trailed her with long strides. She took a deep breath to calm the anxiety flaring up inside her. Her team would be capable of producing an excellent product with limited resources and short deadlines, but she couldn't help second-guessing her performance. She had worked for this for her whole life. 20 years of planning and strategizing had brought her here. Every success and setback had culminated in this moment, which had been painstakingly choreographed and timed to perfection, and now her entire future hinged upon how well the speech went. It had to go off without a hitch, or else Margot might lose any chance of landing in the White House. One tiny glitch might bring it crashing down on top of her, and all her dreams and plans would collapse in a heap of ruin. 20 years of planning and strategizing, lost. It was perfect, Margot. Calm down, William assured her, placing a hand on her shoulder once they exited the studio and got into the car that was waiting for them outside. She inhaled the chilled air deeply, still uncomfortable because of the humid heat outside. You're being uptight and critical. She pursed her lips and averted her gaze, fidgeting with the ring on her finger as she stared out the window. He chuckled quietly at the sight, shaking his head in mild amusement. What did Mr. Goldman say when you talked to him this morning? She finally asked after a brief silence. We need their support, William, and we don't have a lot of time. They said they're willing to discuss further, he replied evenly. They'll be at the fundraiser tonight. We'll do some schmoozing, toss around a few jokes and stories, and they'll get on board. It's handled, all right? You said that about the conference in Maine, she pointed out sharply. And you didn't handle it, so— That was 10 years ago, Margaret, William groaned in exasperation, rubbing his temple as though he were developing a headache. This is as important to me as it is to you, believe me. They had known each other for a long time, since childhood. They'd grown up together in a small town in Virginia, both the children of wealthy financial managers. Attended the same private school, then studied law together at Princeton. All their lives, they'd been in each other's orbits, watching each other's backs, and plotting together toward their mutual goals. It only made sense for them to get married. They worked well together and looked good together. The perfect all-American dream couple. To the rest of the world, William and Margot Smith's relationship looked like a fairy tale romance, meeting as children, marrying young, and then staying together through thick and thin. He had been by her side throughout her entire career, from her early days as a federal prosecutor to her tenure in Congress, and now to her position as the official nominee for her party's presidential ticket. If Margot ever needed positive press, she'd trot William out for a scenic stroll through the park. Or she'd go visit a school, or whatever else it took to make sure their machine ran smoothly. You were out with Tom a week ago, she added pointedly. This is not the time to be taking risks like that. There was no risk. We're two adult men going to a football game. All anyone thinks is that you and I are regular, down-to-earth people who do wholesome things with our friends sometimes, he replied, rolling his eyes.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?